Let's say you come to play a solo over a 12-bar blues, what scales do you need to know? Minor pentatonic, major pentatonic, the blues scale, or even heaven forbid, mixolydian? Well, what if there was a pattern so simple you always knew which notes to play and at the same time unlocked much more advanced blues concepts like playing the changes and blending minor and major together? Well, of course there is, and I'm about to show you how you can create a solo like this. We'll come back to that solo later, but let's start by learning a really simple scale pattern we can use. Firstly, all we need to do is play any E-shaped bar chord, like this A here at the 5th fret. Then we can remove our little finger and this becomes a more bluesy sounding A7. Now let's take the notes just from the top 4 strings from this chord, and this forms the first part of our scale shape. As these notes, G, C sharp, E and A, are chord tones directly from our original A7 chord. They will always work perfectly when we solo over that chord. But there's an extra little bit of special sauce we need for blues, and that's this little movement here on the G string. From the minor third up to the major third of the chord. It's a difference between an A minor chord and an A major chord. As you can hear, it has instant blues feel. We can either hammer onto it, slide across, or make a little bend up to it. The second part of our shape is simply all the notes on these same top 4 strings, just 2 frets up from wherever we started. So for A, it will be here at the 7th fret. Now these notes, A, D, F sharp and B, all come from the A major scale, so we can think of them as bright sounding major melody notes we can add alongside our chord tones. An easy way to think of this shape is that wherever our bar chord starts, we have all the notes at that fret on the top 4 strings, then all the notes 2 frets up, and then this little bridge in between on the G string, so 2 bars with a bridge in between. Now, as a scale, it might look like this. I call this the blues chord scale, and you'll see through this video, this is a hugely powerful pattern. So now we know the shape, let's take a look at some licks to get us started soloing. Firstly, this lick. Now this is a great way to open up a solo. It immediately brings in the minor to major slide for blues feel, and then up through the scale to land on the root note, which really outlines our A chord. Now you could vary the second part, for example, by playing a sliding double stop on the top 2 strings within our scale pattern. Then this lick here is a blues classic, which gives us a moving 1 chord to 4 chord kind of vibe. You see it fits perfectly within our pattern and has this bluesy hammer on the G string. Putting these 2 licks together, we get something like this. Now I mentioned earlier that this concept opens up more advanced techniques, so let's see how it easily enables us to play the changes. By playing the changes, we mean creating lead lines in a way that the listener can still hear the underlying chords changing throughout the solo. So taking the licks we just learned, the beauty of our pattern is we can now move them to any chord. So we can start out playing down here on the A chord, but then when our progression moves up to D, the 4 chord in the key of A, we can play exactly the same licks, but in the position of the new chord.
You
You see our whole blues chord scale pattern shifts up to the 10th fret where the D chord starts. So not only do all these notes fit perfectly over that D chord, they actually spell out the chord in the listener's ear. As you can hear, we now have a solo that clearly articulates that chord change from A up to D. Then, when the 5 chord comes around, which would be an E, we can do exactly the same again. Now, of course, you're not always going to want to play identical licks over each chord, but just with this simple example, you start to hear the huge amount of potential this approach gives. Now, I can hear some of you saying, this is all well and good, but it's not really that full fat blues sound I'm looking for. Where are all those tasty bends and darker blue notes I love? Back to our blues chord scale shape in the A position. And let's just focus on these top 3 strings. Now what we find is, just outside of our shape, just 1 fret up, there are 3 darker minor sounding notes we can access. So on the G string, here at the 8th fret, we get an E flat, which is the really dark blue note from the A minor scale. On the B string, we get a G, the flat 7 from A major. And then on the high E, we get a C, the minor 3rd from A major. 2 great ways to access these notes. Firstly, string bending. So a little half step bend on any of these top 3 strings from our blues chord scale immediately takes us up to a darker, bluesier sound. Secondly, it works really well to play these notes directly but not linger on them. For example, you could glance off them as grace notes like this. Or use them in a faster moving run like this. Now, of course, you can move this around the guitar and access these notes from any chord. So by adding any of these extra notes, we automatically create blended major and minor tones, which is kind of the holy grail for intermediate blues players. Now, anyone interested in theory may have noticed that our pattern now contains every note from the minor pentatonic, major pentatonic, minor blues scale, major blues scale, and the mixolydian. So every note we might need is right here in this shape. So now we know how this pattern works and the concepts it can open up for us, let's go back to that solo I played at the start and see how it all comes together. There's a link to the tab below, so I won't spell out every note I'm playing, but rather explain my overall approach. So I started on A, the 1 chord, with that same lick that we saw earlier. And this was really the basis for the whole solo. Then the same start point into bar 3, but then bringing in one of those bluesy little bends, and then again, another one there. Then when moving up to the D chord, I was using this same type of technique again, but I was playing it obviously now in this position, but I actually played it so this second part came first as an anticipation just before the first beat that the D started on. So I landed here with this little hammer on and all these chord tones from the D7 chord right on that first beat of the bar. Then over that D chord, I used the double stop slide on the top 2 strings, followed by a couple of bends on this note, the first time also using the note on the high E at the same time. Then back to the A position for some partial chords, followed by this double stop slide up to those 2 darker blue notes. Then up to the E position and very similar licks again. Notice I'm using that little half step bend on the high E there. up to the minor third for that extra bluesy feel, and then back down to the A position. I'm going to use that exact same bend again. And now after that bend, there are a couple of little triplet runs using these outside darker blue notes on the B and G strings. And then that bit with the minor to major hammer on, back to the root, and then end on a rootless 13 voicing, just to give us a little bit of jazz to finish off on. So I hope that was useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.